Welcome to the Kapital News. I'm your host, Alex Karitis. Today is Wednesday, November 11th, 2020, 11/11. Also Veterans Day, so happy Veterans Day to all of those who have served our country. We thank you very, very much for your sacrifice. Title of today's podcast, Bailout Nation. I may have done a podcast in the past under this same title or something similar, but nonetheless, I think it's important to bring it back up again, because we clearly are a bailout nation. And I came across a documentary today that I watched, or documentary-esque, of the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And this was done by Vice News in conjunction with HBO. And they got pretty much all the big names together and interviewed them. I'm talking Hank Paulson, former Treasury Secretary, Timothy Geithner, former Treasury Secretary and former President of the New York Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, former Chairman of the Fed, President George W. Bush, President Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and some other big-name politicians, etc., etc. And basically, they were just going over what they recall during that time, what they did, why they took the actions that they took, justification for it, of course. And a lot of the big bankers and CEOs were interviewed as well. And I just think it's always important to use history as a guide, because those who don't understand history are doomed to repeat it. And we have made some colossal mistakes in the past. Several months ago already, we took the time here at the Kapital News to do, I don't necessarily want to call it a mini-series, but we devoted a few podcasts to going over the history of the Great Depression. Not in great detail, but enough to highlight the similarities as to what was taking place in the late 1920s that led to the 1929 stock market crash, the actions that were undertaken and implemented by the federal government because they had to do something, and then how those actions to do something led to the Great Depression, and how similar what was done 80 years ago, 90 years ago, is being done again today, and it already has been. The Nobody Cares Act, the alphabet soup of all of the emergency facilities that reside within the Federal Reserve. If it was millions then, it's billions today. If it was billions then, it's trillions today. Which is also quite interesting, too, because Hank Paulson, I think, mentioned this a couple of times throughout this documentary, how he didn't want to go to Congress and use the T word. He didn't want to come out and say trillion. Now, we throw around trillion like it's candy, like it's nothing. This is only a decade ago, ladies and gentlemen. The great financial crisis. That's all it was. Now it's trillion this, trillion that. What difference does it make? Some of us are going to live long enough to see these idiots throw around the word quadrillion. It's utterly ridiculous. I don't even think the human mind can truly comprehend that word and that number, quadrillion, and what that means. We struggle enough as it is with billions and trillions. But now we throw around trillions like it's absolutely nothing. A few trillion in the Nobody Cares Act. Democrats want to do another 3.5 trillion. Oh, we can get that down to 2. Maybe the Republicans will come up and the White House will come up to 1 trillion, 1.5, 2 trillion, what have you. It's nothing. And that's with the Republicans, pretending that they have grown a spine. Oh, well, I guess we can't do 3.5 trillion, but maybe 1.5 trillion we can do. Maybe we can do that. And we're going to get back to the documentary in a little bit more and talk about what they did and what's likely going to continue today. But obviously we talked about the announcement from Pfizer with the vaccine, 90% effective or whatever number they want to give us. Well, now it comes to light that the CEO, off of this news, sold some of his stock. I think somewhere in the range of $5 to $6 million he put in his pocket. Now, of course, we could do the math. I don't actually have the stock price in front of me, but it doesn't matter. The point that I am making here is that headline coming out to juice the stock price could have put an extra 500,000, an extra million, million and a half in his pocket. Boom, like that. This is what happens when there's no accountability. This is what happens when CEOs of publicly traded companies take the lead from the President of the United States. The fish rots from the head down, ladies and gentlemen. How many times over the course of this administration has the President himself or with one of his lackeys out there, Treasury Secretary Larry Kudlow, some other economic advisor, Commerce Secretary, whoever, come out and juice the markets? Markets are selling off. Go out and tell them that the trade deal with China is going beautifully well. Of course, we don't have a trade deal. It's a piece of crap. But he doesn't care. They don't care. Just juice the markets. Well, if the president can do it, why can't the CEOs do it? So now it has to become standard operating procedure. Any journalist that interviews these idiots now has to ask them when they come out with these headlines, are you going to sell your shares? Or did you? Off of this news? Because now the people have to know. Because don't you think if this was really that effective and it's going to be that fantastic that the CEO wouldn't have sold his stock? He would have bought more. He would have bought more because this 5-6 million that he just put in his pocket, if it's so effective, it's so fantastic, maybe next time when it really comes out and proves to be that effective, would have been 10 million, 15, 20, 30 million. Who knows what the share price would have done if this really proved to be effective? Now, unless this CEO placed a bad bet over the weekend and owes his bookie a few $1 million, maybe that's why he needed to cash out. But this is not a vote of confidence, in my opinion, from this CEO. What would have been a vote of confidence is if he had put $5 to $6 million more. He said, yeah, I want to buy more shares of this company, of our company. No, he didn't do it. He sold it. And of course, the media just fails to cover this. Doesn't ask these questions. But if it's on the other side, they're all over it. Take, for example, Harry Markopolos, who we've discussed here before, a forensic accountant. Gained some notoriety, if you will, for discovering or uncovering the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. And we talked about him last year with respect to General Electric, because his forensic accounting firm, they're basically, there's a lot of firms out there like this who do this. They basically serve as external whistleblowers, meaning they conduct a forensic audit of these companies, and they report their findings to the SEC and to the Treasury Department and perhaps other agencies within the government, basically through whistleblower laws and protections. And these forensic accountants, this is how they make their living. Because if the government should concur with their findings and then go after these companies, civilly or criminally, and these companies get fined, well, then these forensic accountants end up getting a percentage of what the government brings in, because these corporations are defrauding their investors, and they are perhaps defrauding the U.S. Treasury because they're not paying the proper amount of taxes. Okay, so there are a lot of issues there, but this is how a lot of people make their money. But what was interesting here with Harry Markopolos was he was also sort of somewhat joined at the hip, had an agreement with a hedge fund that was short selling GE. So when this information came out, of course, it wasn't good information. It was negative information for GE. I said, well, Harry, did you come out and do this because you have a financial incentive to do so? Of course he does. Of course he does. My point is the media is all over it on one side, but if it's to the upside with respect to Pfizer in a quote-unquote positive headline to juice the stock, well, that doesn't seem to be an issue. But I'm at least glad that they talked about it, that this at least came to light. Oh yeah, he announced it, and he sold off and put $5-6 million into his pocket. This is the game that's being played. I'm telling you, folks, these rats know what's coming. and they're abandoning ship. They're just getting as much as they can before the ship goes down. Some market performance overnight right now. We have the dollar index relatively flat, 93.03, and not too much movement across any of the major pairs, so we'll ignore that. But again, the dollar index at 93.03. Overnight futures trading for the Dow Jones Industrial Average is down about 0.6%. The S&P 500 is down 1/3. NASDAQ 100 is gaining 253 points, up 2.17% right now. Japanese cash trade is also up 0.6%. The Japanese Nikkei, their stock market, is at its highest level since 1991. The stock market peaked back in late 1989, early 2000. Don't remember the exact date, but I know it was somewhere around there. And still a long way to go for the Japanese markets to hit those all-time highs. Back in 1989, 1990, I think it was somewhere around 36,500, somewhere around there. It's currently at 25,500, so still a long way to go. Across the pond, an up day. UK market's up 1%. Everything else was in the green. Cash trade in Australia is also currently up 1% right now. On the commodity front, we've just seen a big rally in commodity prices with respect to WTI, back above $40 and is currently trading at $41.55. That's WTI. Brent is at $43.87. Natural gas is at $3.05. Men's a day for gold and silver. Both are currently in the green overnight. Gold is at $1,869 an ounce. Silver is at $24.24. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen with commodities, especially with oil. What's the demand picture? I mean, we had crude oil, WTI, at $35 a barrel the other day. Now it's north of 40 again. So there's some volatility here. You have the Europeans introduce more restrictions, more lockdowns, what have you. Some of that might take place again in the United States. I hope it doesn't, but I won't be surprised if it does. So that decimates the demand side of the picture. We understand that. I don't know if this is off of the back of the Pfizer announcement, the vaccine all of a sudden. Of course, I know there were some draws out of the inventory, but for this to have moved this much, this quickly, it's a little bit of a head scratcher for me, but it's going to be interesting to see if this corrects again. We'll keep you updated. Uncle Sam's 10-year junk note is yielding 0.94%, so still with that 9 handle. What's the bond market telling us? Is this growth? Is this inflation? What's coming down the pike? I don't believe it's growth. I can see the inflation. The growth, I'm not buying it. But we shall see. Yesterday, we also talked about some potential scenarios with, our State of the Union, where we're at, where we're likely going to be. I just want to highlight this point because I continue to see this somewhat on my Twitter feed and, I hear it elsewhere as well. Right-wing media platforms, not Twitter, some other thing. I'm not going to mention them by name. If you probably heard of them, you'll see them, you can find them. It's not a problem. I'm just not endorsing anything here because I don't like this social media. Because the point that I'm making, you don't like Twitter, that's fine. And a market solution, a legitimate market solution, would be then to start your own company and run it how you think that company should operate. That's perfectly fine. But what concerns me here is this is just going to be another social media platform. So if the conservatives want to become outraged that they are being, quote-unquote, silenced by Twitter or other tech platforms, and they create their own, then all they're going to do is be another echo chamber. Except it's their echo chamber, so it's A-OK. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it because it's their echo chamber. They might think that Twitter and other social media platforms are an echo chamber for the left, and to them, that's a big no-no, but if they do it, then everything's perfectly A-OK. What concerns me about this is I think this is going to lead to further division, further divisiveness. People getting deeper and deeper into their respective silos. We have to leave Twitter. We have to go to this one or to that one. And all it's going to be are people regurgitating the same talking points and circulating the same articles to reinforce what they already believe, as opposed to having a diverse set of information, a real robust discussion and debate. And the only way you're going to get that type of robust debate is by having other people on the platform of other persuasions with different ideas who are tolerated to be there, who are invited to be there. Because all this is end up going to be, because this is just what happens. We have too much evidence of this as to how people behave. What happens on Twitter is going to end up happening on these other platforms. But it's just going to simply be, this is the right-wing platform. This is what these people want to hear. This is their echo chamber. So that's what it's going to be. I hope I'm wrong about that, but that's most likely what's going to happen. So just watch and wait, and we'll see. But I'm not joining this, and I don't want to pay attention to it, to be perfectly honest with you, but that's what's likely going to happen. Now, to talk about some divisiveness, and one of the reasons why we find ourselves where we are today, why the state of our union is a disgrace, why it's such an embarrassment, is because of what took place during the great financial crisis. Now, these people, former Treasury secretaries, former presidents, former politicians, current bankers, former bankers, they all justified what was done because it benefited them. It benefited them. And of course, it was at the expense of the country. It was at the expense of our principles. But people didn't care because, well, we got to keep the markets alive. We have to keep the 401ks up. Well, our 401ks lost 40%. Yeah, well, if we didn't do all this, it would have been 70%. Would have been an even bigger loss. Well, it was an even bigger loss. It was the country. It was the country that lost. And we continue on that path. We continue to bail out the same banks that are even bigger now than what they were a decade ago when they were deemed too big to fail. So figure that one out. And now it's above and beyond the banks. It's the largest corporations in the world. And I have to stress that it's global, that it isn't just American companies. It's one thing for the Federal Reserve to buy government debt. It's another thing for them to get involved in buying mortgage-backed securities, which is what they did with quantitative easing, which is what they did during the great financial crisis, which is what they continue to do today. And they are expanding it. That was residential. Now they're getting into commercial. And they're moving into the corporate bond market, to the junk bond market. They are one step away from purchasing equities outright. And of course, I already think they're doing it, just in a roundabout way, by partnering up with BlackRock, a money management firm, one of the largest in the world, who happens to have, I don't know his title, managing partner, senior vice president, what have you, who used to be a former governor on the Federal Reserve. Geez, I wonder how they got that contract to manage all this money with very little to no accountability. Geez, I can't figure it out. Can't figure it out. But what was noted in this documentary, and I'm glad that they did, that they highlighted the rise of the Tea Party and the rise of Occupy Wall Street. Because a lot of people were, of course, outraged that the government was coming to the rescue to bail out these large banks, which the people blamed and were trying to hold to account, have some accountability, have some responsibility, predatory lending. They knew what was going on, but they did it anyway, so they could pay themselves huge bonuses. Most of the people were against these bailouts of these banks. And then, of course, this was during 2008, which was an election year. And we have a new president, Barack Obama. He doesn't want to rock the boat. He's not there behind the scenes. There's only so much information he's privy to. So he comes in. I just want to continue with what the Bush administration was doing, what Hank Paulson was doing, what Tim Geithner was doing, what Ben Bernanke was doing. And in fact, he appoints Timothy Geithner to be his Treasury Secretary. So this is just a continuation of these people in serious positions of power. One after the next. There's no draining of the swamp. These same people are still there, running around in the halls of power in our government. But this is where it really started to break down. Our society really started to break down. Because, okay, you bail out the banks, that's one thing. Maybe you can use the scare tactics. It's going to be another Great Depression. Stock market's going to tank 70%. Everybody's going to be out on the street. Okay, you do the fear mongering. You get that done. $700 billion in TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program, whatever. Okay. Then Barack Obama gets in and says, well, what about the people, right? What about Main Street? What about the people who are getting kicked out of their homes? Well, that ain't right either, right? We got to do something for those people. So let's come up with a bailout for them. Well, this really gets the Tea Party movement going. Because people like, no, you just took all my money to bail out the banks and all their poor behavior. Now you're going to take more of my money through the taxpayer, and now you're going to give it to a bunch of people who were over their head that bought a bigger house than what they should have had. Meanwhile, I'm still struggling. Meanwhile, I still have a lot of job insecurity, uncertainty, I should say. I don't know what's coming down the pike. You're not going to take more of my money now to bail out people who should be foreclosed upon, sad to say. So it was the Tea Party, TEA, taxed enough already, right? This caused gridlock. Now the Republicans and the Democrats and President Obama can't get anything done. Can't get anything done because we are becoming a bailout nation. There's no responsibility. There's no accountability. But people make the argument. It has to be logical. If you can bail out the billionaires, why can't you bail out Main Street? And then the documentary, again, I'm glad they did this. Note how this became the rise of Occupy Wall Street. So you got the Tea Party, who's upset with the government, and you have Occupy Wall Street, who's upset with the banking system. All the while, the media wants to make you, the public, believe that there are big differences between the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street, that one is owned by the right, the Tea Party, and one is owned by the left, Occupy Wall Street. That's ridiculous, but that's what they want. Divide and conquer. So many similarities between what the Tea Party was arguing and what Occupy Wall Street was arguing and advocating for. But God forbid the government allows the people to unite, or the media allows the people to unite, because if they unite, they're going to go after the powers that be. Can't have that. You got to have the people attacking each other. Got to have the Tea Party at war with Occupy Wall Street. You have to have Occupy Wall Street at war with the Tea Party. Are you picking up on the game, how they do this yet? And back then it was hundreds of billions. Now it's trillions. Running away with all the money right in front of you. Pay attention. And then I appreciated how the documentary said, well, now, with all of this divisiveness, Republicans can't work with the Democrats. Democrats can't work with the Republicans. The Tea Party's against the Occupy Wall Streeters, etc., etc. Now this gives rise to who? Donald J. Trump. And this is another history lesson. Because this country isn't the first country to experience a decline, to experience a moral, social, political, and economic decay. This has happened before. The collapse of the Soviet Union and other Eastern European nations. This has happened through Latin America, through Asian countries. This has happened before, and when you have countries at these extremes, going through these declines, it gives rise to somebody who can tap into that emotion, tap into that populism, and a lot of norms can be thrown out the window and overlooked because the decline is so important. That takes precedent. How people feel. Above the logic, above the reasoning, above traditions and norms. Put those aside. If somebody's going to be a little boisterous, a little vulgar, okay, we can tolerate that because everything else is going down the crapper. And this is what we have been dealing with. And to the president's credit, he has mentioned this several times throughout the years, that the reason that he's there is because the Obama administration was no good, and they weren't. And they weren't. But Trump's no better. There's no draining of the swamp. How many times we got to go through it? This is a divided nation. It's a bailout nation. And they're going to continue to call for more. What the size of it's going to be, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I think it's still going to be up in the trillions once the dust settles. I mean, they can continue to play hardball. They can continue to say, well, the jobs report came out. We got 6.9% headline unemployment. We got Pfizer coming out with a vaccine. The stock market continues to rally, making all-time highs or close to it. What do we got to... everything's fine. Everything's fine. Until it isn't. Until it isn't. And then the other question that I continue to have, that I think needs to be posed. Not that I'm for it, but this is a question that needs to be asked. This question should have been asked of Bernanke, of Paulson, of Geithner, of Obama, of Bush, all of them. Of Chairman Powell right now, all of them. If we can print this money to keep the financial system alive, to keep zombie corporations afloat, then why can't we just print more money to end homelessness and starvation and to eradicate diseases in areas that we know we have vaccines for or therapeutics? People are still dying of these diseases. I mean, why can't we print the money and take care of all these people? Why isn't this question ever asked? Where are the bleeding heart liberals on this? Where are the Bernie Sanders? Where are the Elizabeth Warrens bringing this up? They're nowhere to be heard. I don't hear this. Again, I flipped through all the stations. I don't hear this from Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC or Rachel Maddow or Anderson Cooper on CNN. I don't hear this. What about the evangelical Christians on the right? We can print all these trillions to keep the banks afloat, give it to corporations that don't need it, and then give it to corporations that shouldn't have it because they should be going through bankruptcy. Well, what about I guess that's the Christ-like action. Keep those people propped up. Keep those businesses propped up, but those who are starving, those who are dying needlessly, I don't know what to tell you. Don't know what to tell you. And I'm not saying the money should be printed to go for that, but if there's no consequence, then yeah, it should be printed and given to those people. So you either give a bailout to everybody, or you don't bail out anybody. And that's my answer. You don't bail out anybody because this is what happens. I have been consistent on this. I've been on the record on this podcast, in writing, and years ago on our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing. You cannot do this. The government, it will continue to pick winners and losers. This will continue to cause social anxiety and concern across the country because people can see, well, that's my money. These guys put together these programs. They gave the money out. These were their bets. These were their investments. It's their risk. Why am I paying to bail them out? And then they go the other way, like Obama did. Well, now we got to take care of the people who are being foreclosed upon. Oh, hell no. We're not doing that. That's my money. I have job uncertainty. I got mouths to feed. My wife has health issues. I don't know what's going to happen. You're going to take more out of me to take care of somebody else? That doesn't make any sense. And then the media loves it. The politicians love it because now there's an issue. Now they can get the people divided. Now they can take a stand. So you're either with us on the Republican side or you're with us on the Democrat side. As opposed to being for the United States of America. We are spiraling out of control because we can't have a conversation with each other. People are going to get deeper and deeper into their respective silos. They're going to join other platforms that just serve as an echo chamber to what they want to hear. Which just means it's going to be that much more difficult for them to have a conversation with the other side, or with any other side, or to identify the truth when they hear it. They're not going to be able to do it because there is going to be so much misinformation and disinformation circulating, which there already is. But as long as it sounds like what they believe, or it's what they want to hear, then to them, it's going to be the truth. And that is extremely dangerous. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. A lot more of this is going to take place. A lot more bailouts are going to be coming. The banks don't want to give the small businesses, mid-sized business, because they know what's coming. They know the bankruptcies are coming. They know the insolvencies are coming. I mean, they have floors and floors within their skyscrapers, and now they're working from home, of risk management professionals. They know what's coming. They're just never going to come out and admit to it. But they'll line up for that bailout money. No question about it. So that's it. You can find that documentary on Google. I think it was something Panic in 2008 or something, or this, that, or the other. Andrew Ross Sorkin, he's on CNBC. I'm sure you're all familiar with him. Find it, watch it. I think it was a little over an hour. Educational, informative. And it's simply a continuation. They never got away from the Bailout Nation. We continue to do it here every single day. Nobody Cares Act, 96-0, no votes for America. Don't ever forget it. Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.